This is Lessons Learned, and I'm your host, Matt Kennard, CEO of Better Lesson. Join me as we dig in with visionary state and district level leaders who share our mission to support every K-12 educator in developing the next generation of resourceful, compassionate, and resilient learners. Lessons Learned is brought to you by Better Lesson. Let's get started. All right. Welcome to Lessons Learned, Season 2, the Better Lesson podcast. We are really excited to be joined by Superintendent Patrick Ward of Willoughby-Eastlake. For those who do not know where Willoughby-Eastlake is, go to Cleveland and then go slightly outside of Cleveland, and you will be there. I actually had the good fortune of getting to spend some time with Superintendent Ward and his team actually a few weeks ago. So really excited to have you on. Patrick, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled for the opportunity to be here and so appreciative of the invitation. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, listen, one of the things that we love to do here on Lessons Learned before we go into anything else is to understand folks' kind of journey into the education space, maybe where you grew up, what your school experience was like, and what attracted you to wanting to be a school leader. Now, I know, and our audience is going to hear it, a lot of us wanted to be like a second baseman for the Boston Red Sox. I feel like you had a slightly different journey than the rest of us.
I sure did. I'm one of the few lucky individuals that knew by the time I was in second grade that I wanted to be a teacher. And it's funny, I remember sitting in second grade with Miss Perseni and just absolutely adoring the work. And I would go home every day and I would share with my parents that this is what I wanted to do. And it's funny that no matter where I've been on my educational journey up to this point, I often use that as a conversation starter with educators today, because I would love for our students that are sitting in our classrooms today to be looking up at their teachers like they were second basemen or women and, just admire and respect the profession enough to want to choose to do it. So, second grade is where the journey began. I was fortunate that I got to teach science, and I did that for, a decade and fell in love with the classroom, and then transitioned into administration. I got to serve in various administrative roles. My favorite role was curriculum director, where I got to work on teaching and learning full time without the distraction of everything else sometimes that creeps into the work. And then, by good fortune and luck, had the opportunity to interview for my current job, which is the school district my children attend, and a community I love and live in. And so I found myself here today, sitting in the superintendency with a really good team around me. And I don't think, if you look at 25 years, I've worked literally, I felt like I've been working for one day, right? It's just a joy. And it's just an honor to be a public servant in this particular lane.
That's an incredible journey. And I love the idea of not only did you know what you want to do early, I think a lot of us have a favorite teacher, a teacher who we looked up to, who maybe made us feel the magic in a classroom. And I'll just say, as a person who was a late in life ed techer, I came into this industry about a decade ago. It's been so cool to get to experience that magic as a part of your day-to-day professional life. I am jealous that you've gotten, 25 years of getting to do that. I'm a little behind you there, but I think all of us know that moment. And I think the idea that we can give every kid that favorite teacher moment, give every kid that moment of magic where they feel seen and heard and capable. It's an incredible place to be. I'm glad you had it in second grade. I wish all of us can have it actually in second grade.
So that drives my leadership when you talk about creating a school system where students can be exposed to that earlier. And have more opportunity and more agency and more time to become the best versions of themselves, right? And so those early roots really set the stage for a lot of my vision today and how we work, to create a school system of the 21st century.
I love that you talk about the system, and we're going to cover CTE, and we're going to cover kind of the portrait of a graduate, which I think is a really cool and unique Ohio thing that you all are able to lean into. But that systems approach, I think so often we think about things like professional learning or scheduling or how we're thinking about we're allocating resources. We think in these very specific use cases, this child, this classroom, this particular use case. How do you help shift that thinking to say, like, when we really want to be successful, and I think I heard you mention this to your team, it's about how we move that system forward. Because I think that's not a conversation we necessarily have enough about the system change as opposed to individual moments of change.
So you won't find a bigger systems guy than myself, because when it's about systems, it's not personal, right? When you've got a profession that's just literally the bedrock is relationships and people, it can get emotional fast and become about the wrong stuff. And so we've committed here, number one, to a shared vision, clarifying collaboratively and collectively who we are and where we're going, and then building systems around it that support that shared vision. And so we've been very intentional over the last 2 years to first establish the culture for this. And then number two, to evaluate the systems. And then our next step actually on the journey is taking this bigger question about alignment. So are we aligned to the system and the shared vision now? And can we make it visible, right? And see it and see the impact. So we've been on that journey and it's helped us through some tough conversations. Like when we have to have tough conversations, our norms establish pretty clear guidelines. It's not about individual people, and we can't make it about that. We have to make it about where the system's not working and for whom, and make decisions about how we move that process forward. And it's preserve relationships for us here because we know it's not ultimately going to be personal. It's about the work. So systems I could talk all day about that work.
Well, on that idea, right? In Ohio, you have the portrait of a graduate. You think about life ready. We also have the idea of college and career ready students upon graduation. And I think that one of the things that I love about the idea of systems thinking is it's a way for us to unify what you are thinking as a district, what parents are looking for their kids, and what external providers like A Better Lesson, who's working with you, but we can all coalesce around this idea that success is really defined by that student at the end of the day being able to go pursue whatever makes sense for them, whether that is direct into a high wage, high availability job or a 4-year college, 2-year college certification program. Does that idea of that future ready or that college and career ready student, start to provide maybe for the first time in a while, a single unifying point across the community, the business community, your external partners, and the district itself?
And so the single biggest unifying conversation we've had is about future readiness. And I think when you talk about the current environment we're in, like right now is the time to be asking how the school and all the systems align to assuring that every student that walks across the stage, is ready for whatever they choose next. That's shifting the mindset from the 1980s, 90s, and early 2000s, where we put kids on paths and said, you're either going to college or going to career. And then we never talked about future readiness globally. We're saying now there's this toolkit that all kids need to have. It's defined as a future ready student. And then if they choose to go to college, they have the tools to do that. And if they choose to go to career, they have the tools to do that. Or some will choose both, get hired in a company and then have college paid for through, training within a company. And so for us, it started very simply with making sure we had a very clear picture about what does our community expect our graduates are going to need to be able to do when they leave us. And that was a year-long exercise. It was some of the most robust, engaging, collaborative conversations I've ever been part of. I recall the community engagement night last April where we had, hundreds of people gathered in school, sitting around tables. Now, you can, in the background picture, we're in a very divisive period of time in the country. A lot of people are fighting about the wrong stuff. Social media is lit up with things that are just absolutely distractions. Yet our community came together that night and was talking about our kids, our future, these competencies. And I remember standing up at the end, like almost getting emotional and just thanking these stakeholders for setting the model, I think, for the nation when it comes to having this really crucial conversation. And so that year-long journey kind of culminated in our portrait, which we launched this year. Rewarding work, it was unifying work, and it's the main conversation right now for us, which is how do we build systems around future readiness?
One of the things that I think a lot about when we think about future readiness is how maligned high school has been as a launch point for kids, right? I think there's been a narrative that, well, if you don't go to 4-year college, then you're not really ready for life. And we didn't think about high school in that way not that long ago. We often thought about it as this can be a launch point for people to have fulfilling lives, be great participants in their families and their communities, and have real choice and voice in where they're headed. Um, One thing that I'm really interested to think about is you're a superintendent, right? We all look 10 years, 20 years into the future. It feels like the model of high school is shifting. It's becoming more responsive to the reality that we don't know what the future of work is actually going to look like in 20 years. As we think about AI tools and new industries popping up and things changing, how are you thinking about future proofing the district itself to be able to continuously meet those needs? Because it feels like we're going to go through rapid shift like we did in the 90s with the internet.
Yeah. So I think you hit the nail on the head here. The single biggest piece of advice to the education world right now is we have to abandon the industrial model. And the industrial model is very fixed and rigid. It was designed to be very, very simple to organize and efficient. The problem is to change that model. I've been part of this for 25 years. Sometimes it's like turning the Titanic when you know the iceberg's right in front of you. So the key to the 21st century is you have to look at being, more aligned to a design mindset, right? Prototypes, more frequent iterative cycles, being willing to pivot quickly, and building those responsive systems within a school community, and empowering teachers to have a voice is part of this work, right? If it's not working in January, why would we wait until the following August to do something about it when we can put systems in place right now that allow for us to provide the support, the enrichment, the intervention, and the engagement for students today? When you talk about the big shift, it's evaluating the systems we talked about, but asking the question is, how responsive are they to a student and what our students need now? And it's funny, you think that sounds like a Herculean task. We have found that if you just give people permission, literally model agency with adults, and give them the runway to do something different, that they're more than willing to step up to the plate. So it's been a really, I think, gratifying experience for me here in the last year and a half, because we've done more in a year and a half with people by just prototyping, and finding what works and what doesn't. And when it doesn't work, it's not like, oh, we're going to get you now. It's let's do it differently, right?
I want to tie it back to something you said a little bit earlier, which is being able to come together as a community, right? And a school district should be a part of the community, and the community should have impact on the district and vice versa. Cuts through so much noise I think we see today, right? And at the end of the day, our goal should be to produce students capable of being great community members, contributing parts of society, pursuing things that they're passionate about and they care about. And to me, there's like two aspects of community outreach that really matter there. I think one is, how do you engage parents and families? And I think in particular, how do we demystify what it means to follow a given pathway? One of the perpetually true things is like the number one predictor of whether or not you can go to college, whether or not your parents went to college, in part because demystifying the system to get there is a big part of the challenge, right? And if you've been there, you've navigated, you understand it. So I would say, if we think about the parental community, the family community, how have you reoriented your outreach to bring people in? And when we're, whether it's coffee chats or bring them inside the wall or thinking about career capstones, what does that mean? And how has that been able to change maybe some narratives within your community?
I think one of the sobering realities for me was that the old model of engaging parents is not going to work anymore, or engaging stakeholders. But the reality is, school's a scary place sometimes for people that aren't in the business of talking school, right? It's like we use language and words, and sometimes, I use the word customized learning, for example. Like, these things can be very simple to the practitioner, but when you talk about the stakeholder, they can be very confusing and potentially off-putting. So how do we just engage in simple conversation around every child, the potential they have, and the pathways that we can put them on earlier? And we found with our parents right now and with some of our coffee talks and our advisory groups and our task force, which are all just, again, collaborative groups that are helping us with the narrative, we found that by starting to showcase as early as fifth and sixth grade some of the pathways that are available to kids in the system later and talking about the opportunities that kids have, students are more likely when they get to high school to choose that more rigorous coursework to challenge themselves when the risk is low. And so, for me, it's about two-way conversation, dialogue, and never, assuming that the language of education sometimes is the only way to connect with people. Personalized learning, it sounds so intuitive, right? But the reality is it's still very confusing to people. Like, why would we do that? It wasn't that way for me. So like, how do we talk about taking every child, their unique strengths they have, and then matching those strengths to like a path that makes them optimally successful? Instead, what we do typically is we identify deficits, and then we just hammer away at those deficits, eroding the joy, I think, from what once was a very exciting process, learning. We could do better and flip that paradigm, and we should do that in partnership with our parents. When you talk about the career capstone, so we are really excited this year. We have a fixed budget. We're not, rolling in cash. We have to think, how do we think differently about providing more for our kids in different ways? And with the advent of artificial intelligence and some of the technologies out there now, we've been able to kind of commit to career capstones for 9th and 10th grade next year. What's nice is any teacher in the district that is interested can teach it. So we have no certification barrier. We're using AI in the background to help personalize and customize the coursework to the student and their career interests. And we're setting kind of a standard curriculum around the design process. So, freshmen and sophomores will take these courses next year in these career clusters. They'll get elective credit, but they'll also be connected with real life examples of these jobs in the field and the path it would take to get there. So if you want to be an engineer, that's great. My young daughter, she's 4. She said, I want to be a doctor, Dad. Like, yay, that's early. You're even earlier than me. But you know how to do that, right? You know how to, and so that's the hope, is trying to demystify the how earlier and get kids more exposure using emerging technology.
I think that age that you just talked about, that 5th to 6th grade transition, right? And, you look at charter schools and you look at private schools, it's amazing, right? Because 6th grade clicks, and then all of a sudden everyone is talking about what you're going to do at 18. And yet sometimes I think in our public school districts, we, to your point, think about deficits, and then we offer thousands of pathways through that may not require a kid to stretch or take more rigorous work, right? Because we're leaning into the deficits versus saying, hey, let's put you in rigorous coursework and see what actually happens. And, the funny thing is, right, the more rigorous the coursework we actually put in front of kids, the more we actually see them rise to that coursework, right? And it becomes an outcome driver by demystifying those pathways and helping them understand where that can go. I love that idea of helping a family say, for our 6th grader, there's a lot of options. And there's options that we may not think about, but there's an actual helping hand to say, hey, if you want to go into health sciences, or you want to think about becoming a coder at the end, or I want to go to Ohio State, right? What does that look like, and what would I need to do? I think it's amazing the work you're able to do there. One other community that I have a question on how you've changed engagement is the business community. And I know that in Ohio, every district has to have a relationship with the local business community that often can be facilitated by the educational service centers as well as partners there. How has that changed, and what are you seeing in terms of building more maybe flexibility and knowledge into your district? You think about career-ready students walking out the door.
So when I visited the community during my first year, as I was listening and learning, the single biggest piece of feedback from categorically across thousands of pieces of feedback was workforce development and engaging the business community. It was so frequent that it even caught me off guard. And so we knew last year that engaging our business partners and bringing them into the school and kind of making sure they realize that they're not this entity on the outside, but very much, well, kind of key stakeholders in helping us, because they know we talk about future readiness, we talk about competencies, we talk about soft skills, we talk about what it takes to be employed in demand fields. Like the experts are out there. And so we brought them in and hosted our first business roundtable last year. When I tell you the buzz was like infectious, like people were giddy to be engaged in this conversation with us. And we honor the fact that we are not experts in trying to prepare kids for jobs that we don't know about, right? I could teach Algebra 1, but I'm not sure what it takes to, be a machinist or go into some of our small businesses and or run the backside of the store. So that conversation was so awesome that at the end, I remember a particular parent of ours who also was a small business owner came running up to me and, almost again, emotional. He looked at me and said, I was a graduate of your high school here. He goes, if this was the conversation we were having when I was in school, I would be in a much different position today. And that just for me clicked and just elevated the urgency of this work. Like we have to get this right. Like in school today, like we have all of the tools available to us to be doing something differently. And so why aren't we? And our business community showed up and they continue to stay engaged. We've met multiple times since then. We're preparing to become our own career technical education consortium, an independent entity, and they have jumped in to help us launch the most impactful pathways and programs for our kids so that they can get the credentials they need. And so we could not be more thrilled about that partnership and the willingness to kind of just get out there and help our kids' families prepare for their future.
I love that tri-party engagement, right? District, parents, and business. In the more that becomes a virtuous circle, right? I think there's an idea that we can continuously improve. One of the things that I also think is really interesting is you've talked about an emphasis on soft skills and using AI to help kids understand how their own preferences and desires and strengths can translate into things that they may want to do in the future. And AI can play an important role. I think there's a lot of fear baked into AI deployment, but I also think there's a huge amount of opportunity. Can you talk a little bit about how you're helping use AI to help support kids and thinking about what their future can look like?
And so I honor and lean into the fear. It is out there. It is real. For a guy who likes change and systems that promote change, I see how quickly this is evolving. And I have to even step back myself and honor the fact that we are not built for this rapid pace of change. We never have been. And this is going to be one that's going to be perhaps the most significant. So what we did is, shocker, developed a collaborative group called our AI Task Force, cross-sectional group of business, families, parents, students, staff, district administration. We began to have conversations about what this means for us and the future of schooling. And we start with our policy. And I'll be honest with you, it is the worst policy I've ever seen. It is so punitive and restrictive that categorically every group said this can't be the policy in place next year. So we opened up the playbook. We looked at model policies, and even the model policies were a little too prohibitive for this particular task force. So step one was this group is advancing the policy work around AI. And then there's the second kind of bucket that emerged from the task force, which is the practice. Like, how do we take AI and not make this a PD initiative? This has to be seamlessly integrated into the business of school to accelerate and deepen impact. If we can do that, then I'm telling you, there are things that I've been waiting 25 years for that are now within reach, right? And so it's about giving the design process a little ride here, getting the tool in teachers' hands, letting them try it, letting them prototype, and then looking for the impact. And then if we can attach it to systems that we already have in place, like our PLCs, our district leadership teams, some of the even things like scheduling kids for courses and how we automate guidance tasks, I think we're going to open up a lot of space for relationships to begin to thrive and teachers and humans to do things in school with each other that we've always wanted to do. We just look at each other in the eye, have conversations, and do that deeper work that I think is now within grasp. So passionate about this stuff.
No, as am I. And I actually love it. And I think it's worth saying this. AI absolutely is something, it's a tool, right? And like all tools is going to have to, we're going to have to define use cases for it that makes sense. And we're seeing, I think, great work and things like some of the EdSafe initiatives and others for use of AI in schools. And that makes sense. But I also applaud the effort that you all are making in Willoughby around the idea that like we can't avoid it and we can't hide from it. We actually have to actively embrace it. And the more we embrace it, it will, as weird as it sounds, enhance our human human connection because it will take and provide more data for us to have meaningful conversation engagement. Being able to remove, for instance, when you think about scheduling guidance, having a counselor be able to actually talk about the benefits of a schedule versus spending an hour trying to even figure out what it could be, right? We know makes a big difference in terms of helping to encourage kids. And so a huge applause for that. And I think that the more we engage it actively, the more we can really understand how to use it well. But if we hide from it and we let the fear reign only, what we're going to end up with actually is the thing that we fear the most, which is kind of unbidden, untested tools in the hands of teachers and students.
Yeah. And again, it's the mindset and agency and experimentation with the safeguards in place, right? And so engaging a task force to help us launch this, we're going to do an AI day of learning in November of 25 that the staff and the task force is really excited about launching. And so, we'll roll into August with the same narrative around future readiness and just continue to lean into, who we want to be as a district.
One other thing that I think a lot about is how do you support your educators? A lot of change coming, robust professional learning, I feel like has to be tied to your strategic planning as a district. Scheduling has to be tied to your strategic planning as a district. Resource allocation has to be tied to your strategic planning as a district. How are you thinking about supporting educators at every level to go through some of the lift and shift that you're asking for?
So one of the most impactful conversations was recently the one we had where we brought in an outside team to kind of provide us some insight into just the state of our resources, right? Staffing, coursework, course catalog. I think people get emotional about how we've always done things until you see it, like in concrete fact, right? So you can neutralize emotion. You should honor it. You should lead into it. You shouldn't discard it, but you shouldn't. Well, I'll spend too much time there until you get to the fact, right? And the fact of the matter is, like, if we're going to say that we want to be a district where it's personalized pathways, personalized learning, then we have to personalize the professional learning for our teacher teams and our PLCs. And again, difficult to do until AI, until, some of the tools that are available, until the system's there. And I was fortunate in a previous district that we got there. We got to a place where we were really able to provide more targeted professional learning, really support teachers with what they needed, all aligned to the mission and vision, all with outcomes that ultimately were tied to it. And so we distinguish it this way here. We say training is for all, professional learning is for what you need, right? And so we'll provide the training on a system, a platform, do the requirements, everyone gets that. But when it comes to what a group of teachers might need, we have to lean into the bigger question, which is how do we support them so they feel engaged and have a voice and buy into what we're doing?
I love that. I love that plan. And I think that when we have been working across the country, I think we're seeing more and more of that push, right? How do you help your vulnerable populations, your late hired teachers, your model, build model classrooms, but really use professional learning not only as a support, but as an opportunity to advance practices. And maybe in some areas where we haven't, traditionally thought about it, but it also feels like there's a much better ability to connect your strategic plan to that professional learning planning as, you build more and more clarity and transparency for teams as well. And that makes a big difference.
So our professional or strategic plan has the first priority is, implementing those collaborative structures that help us do that, right? It's been a year-long adventure to get those systems up and going so that we can lean into them in the future. And it's been quite a journey.
As you're a superintendent, and you're thinking about, this is one of the most challenging times in education, but it also feels like maybe one of the most exciting. What gives you hope and optimism going forward?
So I am one of the rare people who will tell you that this is education's finest moment if we seize it. I think in front of us right now, we have to lean into the fact that 88% of the children in the United States of America attend a public education. And I think public education, despite the narrative, does an amazing job producing, citizens who are prepared for what's next. The system itself, though, is at a crossroads. And the question is, do we have the courage right now as a group of leaders, as a system nationwide, statewide, and locally, to lean into the fact that we don't do this alone, but we have to do this for kids in the future, and it's right now. There's a million things right now that I could be doing, but the most important work I'm going to be doing is impacting the teaching and learning in classroom and vision. So I choose that. When things get a little uncertain, you've got to lean into the core values of the organization. You've got to lean into that shared vision, because that brings us back together and orients us back to where we need to be. And so my job is to not create the panic at the top, to not send the alarm bells off throughout the system. It's to create a steady focus on assuring that this district and this community is going to lead the way in this conversation. And we'll find a way. Like, that's how the design process is intended to work. When a challenge is in front of you, you got to design again. And so I've been overwhelmed by this community in my first 2 years. They are ready, they are engaged, and our students are amazing. And so why wouldn't we work hard to make sure that we get it right for them, right? And set them up on this path. Resources are limited. But if you think from a mindset of adding more without thinking about addition by subtraction first, then you're missing the boat, right? You always add more people, but I think in this environment, it's think differently about the resources that you have, right? And so we have those conversations now as we move into this next chapter for education.
Being able to think differently, I think, it reminds me of the old engineering story. An engineer and their child were building a bridge, and it was out of balance. And the engineer goes to look for more Legos, and it comes back and it's balanced because their child took some Legos away and it all worked, right?
That's it.
There's an opportunity to think about design thinking in a different way. Well, Superintendent Patrick Ward of Willoughby-Eastlake, this has been an absolute pleasure. I share your optimism. I think that like the next 5 years, 10 years, we can transform a public education system to be responsive, ready for what's next, ready to roll into new challenges, but I think also new opportunities. And we'd like to leave you with the last word. Love to hear your kind of closing thought for the audience.
So first of all, I'm so appreciative of the opportunity to have this conversation today with you guys, advance the cause, continue to advocate for the work that is happening, I think, all across the United States around, future-ready schools. My final word would be very simple. Like, put kids first and don't give up, and know that I think our best days are ahead of us. And together, if we're collectively working on this and not fighting against each other, education is education. No matter how we do it, no matter where it occurs, we have to be unified in this singular purpose, that we know that when kids have the skills for future readiness and the paths for success and are supported by loving adults, everyone thrives. And so let's do this together. Let's maintain hope. And the best days are still ahead of us.
Echoes of Jimmy Carter's crisis of confidence speech that thinking that what's better is ahead is the way to go. And we couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you.
Patrick Ward, thank you, sir.
Pleasure's all mine. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks for another great episode. See you in the next one. That wraps another episode of the Lessons Learned podcast. Thank you for listening. For show notes and more about Better Lesson, please visit betterlesson.com/podcast. Lessons Learned is hosted by Better Lesson, the leading provider of data-driven, high-impact, system-wide K-12 teaching and learning solutions. We partner with states and districts to support every educator in developing the next generation of resourceful, compassionate, and resilient learners who are college and career ready. Our work has impacted more than 80,000 educators and nearly 3 million students nationwide. See you in the next episode.